Hello, everybody. I'm John OLoughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and it's my minefield. It's McDuff's Minefields number 298, Empire of Liberty. What the heck does that mean? Doesn't that sound like a contradiction in terms? I mean, how could you have an empire and then have liberty? Well, I think there's a real interesting show ahead because I'm going to delve into what Thomas Jefferson actually meant when he coined the phrase empire of liberty. So, does it have relevance today? I think it does. I hope you will agree after we get into it in about what, 30 seconds. And welcome once again. I'm John OLoughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And thanks for joining me, whether you're on our Rumble show at McDuff Lives, all one word, or on our various YouTube channels. McDuff Lives 1, 2, and 3 are now active, as well as on X and Facebook. Welcome wherever you are watching. And it's great to be able to share with you some thoughts about liberty this morning here. Well, it's a little chilly down here on Mystery Island, but very comfortable here in the house. And so let's explore this idea. Um, I first encountered it when I read this amazing and very impressive book, Empire of Liberty by Gordon S. Wood. If you're into American history at all, then you know who Gordon S. Wood is. And this is actually the Oxford History of the United States series. And he has written, he's covered the period from 1789 to 1815, a history of the early republic. Okay, and the picture on the front of it is a young lady, Liberty, giving nourishment to an eagle and the American flag above her head. So remember all the coins that had Liberty on them, like the Liberty dime, the Liberty quarter? That goes all the way back to the beginning of American coinage, where the image of Lady Liberty is on the front of the coin. That kind of died out in the 20th century, didn't it? What's that about? All of a sudden, we're putting personalities on the coins. Well, we could talk about that. It's an interesting transition that if you're into coin collecting, you're aware of it. So it's just another marker of changes that go on in our American idea of, who America is right now. I think, I have spent a great deal of time over the past 8 years digging into the abuses of the CIA, the stay behind armies in Operation Gladio, all of the big books on how they used the drug trade to finance their regime change operations and paying mercenaries and all that stuff. And it gives a pretty bad name to America when you think about America having business overseas. I think it's why a lot of people quote John Quincy Adams on the point of America does not go abroad seeking dragons to slay. And that, of course, is the author of the Monroe Doctrine. So America has both traditions. And what we've found lately is that going abroad to slay dragons is not, it's not nice. We do it very badly. We become the ugly American. We lose our reputation in the world. And it's shameful, really, when you look at what we've done from Guatemala to Iran to Indonesia to, I mean, everywhere in the world, we have submitted them to a program of terrorism. That's not what Jefferson wanted to do, but he did want to spread America. He thought that expansion of America with this empire of liberty was a good idea. I also have to make a couple of comments before I get into the text I want to read about what is meant by empire. And why would Americans want to have an empire since we are a republic? Okay. In Mindfields number 293, which I presented as an introduction as to what Americans at the time of the revolution thought of as liberty, I think we developed it pretty well with a professor from the University of Chicago and talked through the idea, which is that this idea of hey, I'm just an ordinary middling sort person. I can go walk across town if I want to. I can get on a stage and travel 100 miles. I can buy things. I can sell things. I can go to clubs and talk about things, and I can go and sit and enjoy free speech when I'm at the pub. I can go and support candidates for office. I can print things. I can write things. I can try to get my ideas circulated. I can invent things. All of these ideas that people suddenly had, and I mean suddenly in the course of the 18th century in England and over here in the United States, where it became the dominant practice to be a person who was free to interact with other people without permission, without crossing out of a city without a pass, the things that just could not be done in Europe for over 1,000 years, because everywhere in the world that touched American commerce or people or culture was already an empire or a monarchy. And I think that certain people recognized that in order for us to be that real republic that we all wanted, that beautiful place where everybody could have their farm and everybody could have as many children as you wanted to and just grow and produce and exercise all those rights that I just enumerated, that wonderful idea, it depends upon us having a protection against the incursions of empires from outside. At that time, primarily, of course, the British Empire. And that's why we fought the revolution, so that our republic, our revolution in government, creating our constitution and preserving our individual rights, is the vehicle by which we preserve this thing. And this thing that I'm talking about is called liberty. Now, probably as a grade school student, we know when you pledge the allegiance and you feel, liberty and justice for all. And that's where you get this sense of, yes, I'm living in the right place. This is liberty and justice for all. And in fact, as we grew up, we had no idea that this is a unique situation. And we thought, well, of course, there's liberty in Britain and England and France and, in the colonies and all around the world, Australia. There's liberty everywhere. However, it's not really. It's only because of the unique circumstances of the founding of the United States and the intention of people including Alexander Hamilton, including George Washington, and including Thomas Jefferson. Because as much as they opposed each other, they valued the idea of this liberty enough to fight for it and to believe that that is the future of the United States, and that is the inevitable future of mankind as long as it is allowed to exist and flourish. In other words, we had to have something imperial of our own to protect this cocoon of growth of the culture of liberty. Now I want to turn to Thomas Jefferson for a moment. You know what? I'll share this for you just so if you want to look at it later. Empire of Liberty. This is the Wikipedia article, which I was surprised that there was such an article by that name, but having found it, I think it's fantastic article. Let's listen to it, or let's read it. The Empire of Liberty is a theme developed first by Thomas Jefferson to identify what he considered the responsibility of the United States to spread freedom across the world. You have to stop right there. I said, what? No, we're like John Quincy Adams. We don't go abroad, you know. We don't want to be out there. In other words, the whole Cold War that we've gone through, this horrible Gladio, all these things that we study here, that's the bad side of going out of the country and trying to spread, you know, freedom, right? You know, what we spread is the World Bank. We spread poison agriculture and poverty. And that's been proven over the past 80 years that that's what we do now. But that's not what Jefferson meant. And that's not what the ideal of this country really is. The responsibility of the United States to spread freedom across the world. Jefferson saw the mission of the U.S. in terms of setting an example, expansion into Western North America, and by intervention abroad. Okay, major exponents of the theme have been James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. Okay. Did they all mean the same thing by it? Probably not. But this is talking about a theme that is part of America that from the very beginning that has been suppressed in our media, in our culture, and in our politics. I want my liberty quarters back, okay? Yeah, and I want them silver too. Okay, here's where I think Wikipedia does some spin doctor stuff where he says in the history of U.S. foreign policy, the Empire of Liberty has provided motivation for the Spanish-American War, World War I, the later parts of World War II, the Cold War, and the War on Terror at the present time. See, these things are the dark side. These are the show yesterday, the unspeakable. This is the unspeakable side of American foreign policy. And so we call it liberation or freedom, but it's not, because it's not from a basis of liberty, even at home, where our liberties are now very much constrained, especially in virtue of censorship. and mass media control and conglomerates and cartels and banking. So it's easy to forget that these are two different ideas and that there is a good one, and that is Jefferson's idea of the empire of liberty. Let's read some more. Jefferson used the phrase empire of liberty in 1780 while the American Revolution was still being fought. His goal was the creation of an independent American state that would be proactive in its foreign policy while ensuring that American interventionism and expansionism would always be of a benevolent nature. Quote, "We shall divert through our own country a branch of commerce which the European states have thought worthy of the most important struggles and sacrifices, and in the event of peace, parentheses, ending the revolution, we shall form to the American Union a barrier against the dangerous extension of the British province of Canada and add to the empire of liberty an extensive and fertile country, thereby converting dangerous enemies into valuable friends." A letter from Jefferson to George Rogers Clark, December 25th, 1780. Jefferson envisaged this empire extending westwards over the American continent, expansion into which he saw as crucial to the American future. During his presidency, this was in part achieved by his 1803 purchase of the Louisiana Territory from the French, almost doubling the area of the Republic, and removing the main barrier to westward expansion, stating that, quote, "I confess I look to this duplication of area for the extending of a government so free and economical as ours as a great achievement to the mass of happiness which is to ensue," unquote. Jefferson was not the only founding father to refer to an American empire in their writings. Alexander Hamilton also envisioned an American empire that would eventually surpass that of superpower Great Britain. In 1795, Hamilton wrote of America as the embryo of a great empire. All right, so you understand Jefferson and Hamilton are like opposites, right? Hamilton is the one for strong government, and Jefferson is the one for the least possible central government. I wanted to move on to another reading now. This one from Mount Vernon's website. I found this essay this morning, and I think it's really, really illustrative of the difference between the Hamiltonians and the Jeffersonians, and the fact that, and as this essay's title says, Washington versus Jefferson, the conflict that continues to trouble America. I think that's red versus blue. I think that is our politics, okay? But let's see if you agree. This is by Thomas Fleming. Conflict between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Although numerous historians have explored Jefferson's differences with Alexander Hamilton, little has been written of, and thus few Americans know about, the fascinating, complex, and at times contentious relationship that developed between the two most famous founding fathers. By Thomas Fleming. The differences in temperament and experience between the two men. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on a second. I want to remove that one and see if I can add this one here. Sorry. Okay, let's go. The differences in temperament and experience between the two men were readily apparent. During the 8-year struggle for independence, George Washington learned to live dangerously, surmounting military defeats and attempted betrayals by fellow revolutionists. He rose to worldwide fame as the commander of the American Continental Army. With independence secured, he rejected pleas to banish the bankrupt Continental Congress and become the nation's new dictator. Instead, he resigned his commission and became a private citizen once more. Jefferson's chief contribution to the struggle was drafting the Declaration of Independence. The opening paragraph's soaring insistence that every human being was entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness would ultimately give America's revolution world-transforming power. While our nation's most sacred document was ultimately edited and issued by the Continental Congress, Jefferson is widely acknowledged to be its principal architect. Jefferson also served for 2 years as governor of Virginia, the nation's largest state, during which he struggled to deal with such daunting and discouraging problems, from imminent bankruptcy to British invasions, that he refused to accept a third term. When a disillusioned member of the state's legislature suggested the governor's performance deserved a reprimand, the deeply wounded Jefferson told his friend Madison that he would never again hold public office. The contrast between this emotional reaction and Washington's 8 years of steadfast leadership is striking. All right, fundamental differences. In September 1785, James Madison began visiting ex-General Washington at Mount Vernon to discuss the need for a more effective federal government. They agreed that the Articles of Confederation, the primitive charter Congress had created, was inadequate to the task of governing 13 contentious states. Absence from these conversations, which would have a large influence on the Constitution, was their mutual friend Thomas Jefferson. Madison had persuaded him to accept Congress's appointment as ambassador to France. Washington was first, last, and always a realist. Quote, "We must take human nature as we find it. Perfection falls not to the share of mortals," was one of his favorite maxims. But he combined this realism with a visionary faith that America was destined to become a beacon of freedom for men and women everywhere. Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, was a pervasive optimist who believed that if left to their own devices, free men would inevitably find the path to a good government. Experience had convinced Washington that this happy outcome would only occur with the help of a strong leadership. This was the missing ingredient in the Articles of Confederation. Congress, a body with frequently conflicting opinions, was the sole governing power in the nation. In 1790, Jefferson returned to America and accepted Washington's offer to become his Secretary of State. Despite their dissimilar views on the Constitution and other policies, a particular dispute was a proposal from Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton to establish a national bank of the United States to help manage the consolidated Revolutionary War debt. Nowhere in the Constitution was there any mention of the federal government's power to create a corporation, much less a national bank, but Hamilton argued that authority for such ventures was implied within the document. Jefferson disagreed with the policy. He considered banks to be sources of corruption and feared the new country might be run by a clique of financiers rather than by honest citizens. Okay, hang on a second. What's going on right now? Are we being run by a clique of financiers rather than by honest citizens? Isn't that what we're all up in arms about, figuratively speaking, not with anything dangerous? That's what we are crying out for, is our return to that dream of living in liberty? And how are we ever going to accomplish that while there are foreign powers insinuating themselves into our government, into our people, into our uh, countryside, and into our neighborhood? All right. So the next step in what I wanted to talk about is the Monroe Doctrine. I would reference the previous Mindfields number 297, which I did with Marcia last week, which introduces the idea of the Monroe Doctrine, and I connected it to this subject that we're talking about today, the Empire of Liberty. So back to the big picture, we're trying to have a country that is, the people are free and consider themselves the beneficiaries of this revolution in government, this constitution, or the newer state governments before the Constitution, feeling, hey, we've got this, we're free. And the people being able to do, as I said at the beginning, to do things that just you couldn't do before if you were a serf in Europe, or even if you were a merchant. It's all controlled by either a king or an emperor or some other pasha or something, right? So that's what we're trying to preserve, and that's what our military swears to preserve, the Constitution. So issues come up, and the Monroe Doctrine is issued by President Monroe. I want to share this one too with you. It's another Wikipedia. I think it's definitely worth studying, and it's not everything on Wikipedia is bad, and you can find, it's just like AI, and not everything on it is bad, but you have to be very discerning as to what extent you believe what they're saying. The same thing with Wikipedia. What I want to do is go through all of these examples of the use of the Monroe Doctrine, because I think it tells us, where we're at here with this Venezuela issue, and maybe the Greenland issue as well. All right, I think you can see that now. Good. The Monroe Doctrine is a United States foreign policy position that opposes European colonialism in the Western Hemisphere, which since World War II has been extended to oppose any foreign interference in the Western Hemisphere. It holds that any intervention in the political affairs of the Americas by foreign powers is a potentially hostile act against the United States. Okay, Donald Trump doesn't need anything more than that. That's it. The doctrine was central to American grand strategy in the 20th century. Okay, and once again, is this the same, the Dulles brothers' idea of of spreading freedom and democracy, or Jefferson? There's two different ideas and methods. It's like General Krulak's counterinsurgency versus Ed Lansdale's counterinsurgency, and that is another example of, we have all of these good intentions and we have this idea that we've got it going on, but then we get infiltrated and we get switched and we get taken over by insinuated forces, banking forces. Anyway, back to the article. President James Monroe first articulated the doctrine on December 2nd, 1823, during his seventh annual State of the Union address to Congress. At that time, nearly all Spanish colonies in the Americas had either achieved or were close to independence. Monroe asserted that the New World and the Old World were to remain distinctly separate spheres of influence. Distinctly separate, okay, the whole hemisphere, okay? Not just the Western expansion like Jefferson, but now Monroe saying the whole hemisphere. And thus further efforts by European powers to control or influence sovereign states in the region would be viewed as a threat to U.S. security. In turn, the United States would recognize and not interfere with existing European colonies, nor meddle in the internal affairs of European countries. Okay? Doesn't that sound like what Trump wants to do or what he says he wants to do? Because the U.S. lacked a credible Navy and Army at the time of the doctrine's proclamation, it was largely disregarded, while it was successfully enforced in part by the United Kingdom, who used it as an opportunity to enforce its own Pax Britannica policy. The doctrine was ignored several times in the course of the 19th century, notably with the Second French intervention in Mexico. By the beginning of the 20th century, the United States was able to successfully enforce the doctrine, and it became seen as a defining moment in the foreign policy of the United States. It has been invoked by many U.S. statesmen and several U.S. presidents, including U.S. Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and being substantively reinterpreted in the 2020s by Donald Trump. Okay. Substantively. Wonder what that means. After 1898, the Monroe Doctrine was reinterpreted by lawyers and intellectuals as promoting multilateralism and non-intervention. In 1933, under President Roosevelt, the United States reaffirmed this new interpretation, though co-founding the Organization of American States. Into the 21st century, the doctrine continues to be variably denounced, reinstated, or reinterpreted. According to Samuel Eliot Morison, as early as 1783, the United States adopted the policy of isolation and announced its intention to keep out of Europe. The supplementary principle of the Monroe Doctrine that Europe must keep out of America was still over the horizon. Despite the United States' beginnings as an isolationist country, the foundation of the Monroe Doctrine was already being laid almost immediately after the end of the American Revolution. Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers was already wanting to establish the United States as a world power and hoped that it would suddenly become strong enough to keep the European powers outside of the Americas, despite the fact that the European countries controlled much more of the Americas than the U.S. itself. Hamilton expected that the United States would become the dominant power in the New World and would, in the future, act as intermediary between the European powers and any new countries blossoming near the U.S. Okay, that's Hamilton, the New York Wall Street view. A note from James Madison to the U.S. ambassador to Spain expressed the U.S. government's opposition to further territorial acquisition by European powers. Madison's sentiment might have been meaningless because, as was noted before, the European powers held much more territory in comparison to that held by the U.S. The U.S. feared the victorious European powers that emerged from the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 15. That's when they defeated Napoleon and decided to quash any revolutionary or Republican type of movement. It's 1814, 15. Feared the victorious powers would revive monarchical government. France had already agreed to restore the Spanish monarchy in exchange for Cuba. As the Napoleonic Wars ended, Prussia, Austria, and Russia formed a Holy Alliance to defend monarchism. In particular, the Holy Alliance authorized military incursions to reestablish Bourbon rule over Spain and its colonies. which were establishing their independence. British foreign policy was compatible with the general idea of the Monroe Doctrine. Britain went as far as covertly assisting the South Americans in their fight against Spain. The full document of the Monroe Doctrine, written chiefly by future President John Quincy Adams, is long and couched in diplomatic language, but its essence is expressed in two key passages. The first is the introductory statement, which I'll quote: "The occasion has been judged proper for asserting as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents," plural, okay, "by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintain, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for further future colonization by any European powers." The second passage is addressed to the allied powers of Europe, that is the Holy Alliance. It clarifies that the U.S. remains neutral on existing European colonies, but is opposed to interpositions that would create new colonies among the newly independent Spanish American republics. We owe it, therefore, to candor and to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. Okay? Can we substitute Russia and China for European powers and read the same thing? And is that not the roots under which Trump is declaring his Monroe Doctrine? I'm just saying it's not un-American what he's saying. Now, there's a whole big question having to do with international law. And I have a lot of thoughts about that too. Let me just stop this. I recommend you read both of those articles at Wikipedia and come back to the screen, because I want to talk about the other aspect. Oh, I want to make an important note here. Obviously, when I'm talking about liberty and the culture of the Revolutionary era times, I am not ignoring the fact that we had hundreds of thousands of enslaved African people here working on plantations or otherwise for free labor. And that is a huge problem. And I think all American historians acknowledge that is a horrible, horrible problem when you're trying to assert liberty and at the same time, as Samuel Johnson said, the people who are crying out loudest for liberty, such as Patrick Henry, were also the drivers of slaves. We can't discuss liberty without acknowledging that blemish, that cancer on our society. But what about international law? Okay. We have treaties which, if ratified by the Senate, are the law of the United States. We also have our own internal laws which govern in many ways the way we conduct ourselves overseas. But there is this thing that is often referred to called international law. And so when President Trump says, I don't need international law, the only thing that I am limited by is my own morality. Now, we know what a lot of people think of President Trump's morality, right? Well, I think probably conscience is the idea. But he now is assuming an imperial posture. He is saying, I can do anything and I can make you like it. that type of language and attitude is repugnant to our republic. It is the opposite of what George Washington did when he went back to his farm instead of assuming the crown of a dictator. So on that level, it really is indefensible. The only way that it can possibly make sense is that he is always blustering and bluffing and using uh, colorful and distracting language just because that's the way he is. He's like that poker player, tough talking character. And so we can't always believe what he says in terms of, is he not just going over the top with this idea of I can do whatever I want? Because he is, I think, a spokesman for a team, for a group of people that make foreign policy, and he's really just the front person for it. I don't see him as, an Abraham Lincoln or a George Washington making up his own policy. But what this policy is geared at driving out the foreign powers that he and our American powers that be see as threatening, just like Monroe wanted to do. The problem is that he's allied with Peter Thiel and all of these people that are pushing this technocracy on us. And I'm afraid that appears to have been inevitable in the fact that you have these AI engines coming everywhere. The Democrats have theirs, Musk, Bezos and Gates and these super billionaires that can create things like Palantir are real. So I don't want to be doxxed. I don't want to have a technological cage built around me, like Elena Freeland tells us is coming. I don't want to be on a planetary lockdown. I don't want to feel like I am constricted, because that violates my right to liberty. My right to liberty, the idea of liberty, that I can move about freely, that I am not going to be harassed, I am not going to be surveilled, and unless I commit a crime, I can pretty much do as I please. So this doom of coming down with this technological stuff, I don't think it's necessarily about something that Trump wants. I don't even know if he really understands it. But what I think we can hope for is that if we can extract these foreign powers out of our country, out of our hemisphere, out of Latin America, then we're fulfilling something that was set forth, 200 years ago, that America has to protect the people against these imperial powers from abroad. And we view China as an imperial power, and we view Russia as an imperial power. So in order to have our empire of liberty, which I, at this point, completely understand as being completely multicultural and everybody's in, and there's not any, we will get rid of the remaining racism and prejudices and things like that, because that's not consistent with our idea of liberty either, to get people able to survive without using up all the energy of their lifetimes trying to make money, to find a way that we can be free of this financial uh, dragon that is breathing down our necks, $38 trillion of debt, to break up the money laundering banking system that exists in the Cayman Islands and all the British offshore banking system that has been mingled into our honest money for, what, 50 years now? You know, to restore Glass-Steagall, to get that dirty money out of our productive economy? Do we have to pull out these foreign influencers before we're going to have our empire of liberty? And if that's what Donald Trump is trying to do, then I think it has justification. I think it has national security, real national security that preserves liberty, instead of national security that destroys liberty. I think of the book that I reported on last week, the Scorsese Papers, and how our OSS began at the instance of the British SOE, of the British that wanted us to participate in doing their covert special ops. And, you know, Americans did not consider assassination or torture or, you know, attacks on civilians for terroristic purposes. We didn't consider that to be a valid part of warfare until World War II. And I think when we took that in, when we decided, okay, Ed Lansdale, you can do that stuff under Eisenhower and later, you're good, you can do that, and that has all been a assault against the liberty of people all around the world. It's the opposite kind of foreign policy that I think Jefferson wanted us to have. And so, you know, we do have Madison, who kind of ties both Jefferson and Washington together by saying we do need to respect the Washington's inaugural address, and we need to respect the Constitution, and as well as maintain our individual liberties with our, you know, God-given rights that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. Right now, we're fighting against that deprivation of rights in favor of the technocracy, which is really a great scheme of theft. We're fighting against the loss of our abilities to speak freely, of our abilities to save, as they're going to be invading our savings accounts as sooner or later. Our ability to even understand what's going on in our government. And something's got to change. That's all I'm saying. I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but it does behoove us to recognize that both sides of our American politics, from the the bankers of New England to the planters of the South, cherished the idea of liberty. Jefferson said liberty was more important than nation or government. I'm not sure Adams would agree with that, or Washington, because they're the ones that said, you know what, we've got to recognize the fact that we have to have a strong national government, or else we'll just be pulled right back apart. United we stand, divided we fall. And that's the way it is today. So I hope people won't go out and try to demonstrate their objections to what the federal government is doing right now by blocking vehicles, or yelling at people, or harassing police officers. Even though I hope that we can accomplish this without having to be so damn violent and rough with people. And I see the possibility from way a long time ago that these demonstrations are going to be sparked and created by people that are operating an intelligence operation and drawing as many innocent folks into a violent situation as they can, creating horrific incidents that are going to be blown up in the media to inflame people. And there's a lot of talk about a coming American Civil War. I did a show on it from about a month ago, featuring Professor Jiang. That's Jiang, a Chinese high school teacher that has, gotten the right algorithm. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers now, and he is talking about how America is going to fall apart, and there's going to be a civil war. And I think, we don't have to listen to that. We don't have to listen to that kind of talk, but we have to have some indication of where we can go. How can we feel? How can we get better? How can we improve? And I think things like getting dual citizenship out of our Congress, for one thing, would be good. Making sure that there's not a bunch of hidden arms caches ready for terrorist groups to use. And at the same time, the innocent people that have come here, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them, need to be treated with dignity and the respect that we would hope to be treated with if we were caught in some foreign country against its rules. And to try to lift us out of that horrible sense that our government is promoting and sponsoring and engaging in terrorism and assassination. Because that's not who we are. That's not who we want to be. It's just, if you like John Wayne movies, think about, that kind of a hero. The kind of a hero that stands up for anybody, that interposes with danger, that will stand on principle. And the principle of liberty is the highest principle that we should have in this country. And we should indeed, when we have an opportunity, help other countries to achieve it. We have been doing it the wrong way. We've been doing it like the British Empire did it. And we've got to stop doing that, and we've got to get our own act together, restore liberty, and personal responsibility and community responsibility right now, they're breaking us into cubicles where we all just have our own little computer and we're hardly connected at all anymore. And that's got to stop. I wanted to discuss the idea of the Empire of Liberty because it's just possible that even though Trump might not even know that he's doing it, that by taking on this challenge of extracting the bad stuff out of America, that he could be fulfilling Jefferson's idea and the realistic recognition by George Washington and Monroe and John Quincy Adams that we have got to have a strong central government to protect the liberty of we the people. These sides of America have always worked together except for in the Civil War, and they've got to keep working together. And that means we the people have got to demand a halt to all these incursions on our liberty, a halt to the ugly American overseas, and a halt to financing all of these wars that are going on in Ukraine and Gaza and everywhere else. Does that sound like America first? Okay, I'm America first, if that's what it means. I don't think there's any reason to shame people for being America first. And that has been the problem ever since World War II, was in order to get us involved in World War II, they had to shame the America First people. America First can be good. It can be a good thing, you know. Yes, they were racist. Yes, there were religious bigots. Yes, there were all kinds of ill-educated people promoting something that might not actually amount to liberty. But to put our country up on a pedestal like the founding fathers did, to recognize that we had here the germ of a world that could be free everywhere if we could just preserve it. And restore transparency to our government. You know, the less we're involved overseas, the more we can be involved at home. And the more we're involved at home, the better it's going to be for everybody that lives here. You know, it's a lot of things that I don't like about President Trump, and I, you know, as far as morality, I would give him bad marks. But nobody else is doing this. You know, that's why the Maha people joined the Make America Great Again, MAGA. The MAGA movement is a movement to restore liberty. And it's been downplayed and bad-mouthed by the Democrats ever since it got started. Why? Because they are afraid of exactly what Donald Trump is trying to do right now, and that is uh, to protect the defense, protect the United States against foreign powers being too close to our shores. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's probably 10 times or 100 times worse. We don't know what kind of weapons, you know, are being secreted into South American countries by container ships that we can't examine. Things like that. Are we now approaching a dangerous time in our country's history? I think we are. So do we need to button up? Do we need to tighten up? Do we need to establish our boundaries and concentrate on getting back to the path that our founding fathers tried to set us on? Well, I think I've said it many ways today, and I appreciate your putting up with my Mindfields presentations. You know, it, it's it's just the way that I started doing these things to call it a Mindfields, because I knew that I wasn't going to have a diagram or an outline or text to read or anything. But at the same time, I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to share. And so forgive me for this format, but I feel like I can get it out better and sincerely in, speaking from the heart when I do it in this format. So anyway, that's what we do. Mindfields number 298. And I will be off tomorrow. I'll be back Thursday, and we'll hope to see you then. And don't forget Friday, join us with Marcia for our Friday live chat. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.